I did not hear the phone so much as feel it, the way you feel a house shift in the wind. 3 a.m., Fort Collins was the kind of quiet that lets you inventory your own heartbeat. I stared at the glowing screen until the hospital name made sense. When I answered, a kind voice used professional words that kept collapsing into one meaning. My son, Drew, was gone. A ruptured aneurysm, sudden, merciful, they said. I remember thinking mercy is a strange word to press against a mother's chest at 3 in the morning. I set the phone down and poured hot water over a tea bag I never drank. I watched steam rise like a spirit that didn't know where to rest. The kettle clicked, then the refrigerator hummed, and that was the orchestra that walked me through the next hour. The small, brave sounds of a house doing its best to pretend it could hold me together. The morning brought the practical kind of kindness. Neighbors carried in casseroles with foil lids that reflected my face like a woman I almost recognized. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, arrived in a black coat that fit her the way a rehearsed sentence fits the mouth. She folded her fingers around mine and said she would handle logistics. She was always very good with logistics. Behind her legs, my grandson, Noah, peered at me, clutching his inhaler the way other children clutch a favorite toy. He is 7, tall for his age, with eyes that choose their brightness carefully. He leaned into my side the way he did when he was 3 and thunderstorms had names. I smoothed his hair and felt the weight of a job title shifting in my bones. Mother, yes, but now something else. Something that would require both a softer voice and a firmer spine. The days moved like slow furniture. The funeral was the kind people call tasteful. The chapel smelled of lilies and furniture polish. People said nice things that must have cost them something to carry, and then they put their hands on my shoulders as if they were fastening a safety pin through fabric. Vanessa cried at acceptable intervals. She thanked everyone. She coordinated the slideshow. She looked like a woman performing grief in a language she studied in school and hadn't used in some time. I did not judge her. Grief is a private country. Some people pass through it on highways, some climb it on their knees. After the service, in a small room that tried to be kind with a coffee machine and a bowl of mints, we met with the attorney. His name was Rohan Patel, and he had the particular calm of a person who has organized many storms. He adjusted his glasses and spoke in the clear grammar of the law. He said Drew had left a will. I knew this. My son was an engineer of both bridges and contingencies. Rohan explained how the assets would be handled. The lake cabin Drew adored would go to Vanessa, as would a portfolio Drew had been proud of, not because of what it could buy, but because he'd learned to make something grow. The cars would come to me and some personal accounts. Most important for the long run, a trust for Noah's care and education had been structured with me as the trustee. This is not against you, Rohan said to Vanessa with an open hand. It's for Noah. The documents describe it as protective, not punitive. Vanessa nodded with her jaw. Her eyes flickered, and then she smiled the way people smile when they want a room back on their side. After signatures and pamphlets, Rohan handed me an envelope with my name and Drew's quick letters. I waited until I was home to open it. The letter was short. My son never overwrote. He built things that held because he didn't pretend they could do more than they could. Mom, it began, if you're reading this, I didn't get to argue with you one more time about whether you're resting enough. I have one request. Don't pick fights. Write things down. Trust your paper more than your anger. If Noah is ever not okay, if common things slip, use the records to keep him safe. Rohan will help. I'm asking you to do the job you do better than anybody. Pay attention. There were 2 lines at the bottom that caught me like a net. You taught me, kindness isn't soft. It's disciplined. Use that. There are mothers who become generals overnight. I did not feel heroic. I made a cup of tea I finally drank and took a clean notebook from the drawer where I keep important papers and stamps. I put the date at the top. I wrote, Noah used inhaler at 8:10 a.m. Calm after. It was the kind of sentence that doesn't belong in a poem, but I knew it might belong in a future that needed proof more than it needed eloquence. The weeks after a death are a strange theater. Everyone moves to their assigned marks. Vanessa was efficient with thank you notes and accounts to close. She called insurance companies without letting the cold of their hold, music leak into her voice. She took meetings with someone in Phoenix about a work opportunity. It's not a decision, she told me, brisk but warm, just a conversation. The market there is on fire. Noah's school sent home a flyer about parent-teacher conferences. The paper spent a day on the kitchen island under a vase of lilies that reminded me more of funeral homes than gardens. When I asked Vanessa if she wanted me to schedule, she blinked, surprised. Oh, shoot, yes, can you? She was dressed for a luncheon and smelled like a perfume that could convince a room that everything was under control. Noah's asthma flared twice that month. Nothing dramatic, but used inhalers tell the truth. A pharmacy alert chimed on Vanessa's phone and on mine. I had asked to be added as a backup. She texted, Can you grab it? I'm tied up. I did. I tucked the receipt into my notebook. I jotted down the date, time, and the way Noah's breathing evened out after we watched a cartoon about friendly robots. I wrote it all because the letter told me to, and because the act of writing steadied me. In early March, Vanessa sighed over coffee and said, as if offering me a new brand of laundry detergent, Greg has a development in Scottsdale. There's a position that would be, well, it would be good for us. For me, for Noah. I stirred honey into my tea and asked what good meant. She spoke about school districts with high ratings and backyard pools and more sun than a boy with a tender chest might need. I said serenity often looks like sunlight until you count the miles. That's dramatic, she laughed. It would be fine. I'd fly back lots, or you could visit. It's just Arizona. She said it the way people in movies say it's just a flesh wound. I called Rohan. I told him my son had asked me to trust my paper and keep my anger on a shorter leash than my patience. I told him what Vanessa had said. He didn't rush me. He asked me to keep doing what I was doing. Document. The law doesn't decide families on hunches or adjectives, he said. It likes nouns and dates, and a line of simple sentences that point in the same direction. He told me to keep receipts, to print emails before digital dust could make them hard to find, to ask Noah's teachers for written notes when they had concerns. Don't make an enemy of Vanessa, he added. Make a friend of time and order. That weekend, Vanessa texted that she had to attend an overnight event with clients, and could Noah stay with a sitter recommended by her colleague. I said, bring him here. She replied that the sitter was already arranged. It would be good for Noah to be flexible. Noah arrived at my house the next morning with circles under his eyes that looked like smudged thumbprints. We baked bread together because it makes a house smell like it remembers how to care. He drew a picture of a green dinosaur in a boat. He put 3 stick figures in the boat, one tall, one medium, one small, and asked me how to spell lake. I wrote the letters slowly so he could copy them. His printed A's were ambitious. When Vanessa came by that evening, she brought a bouquet of sunflowers and a brochure for a family resort community in Arizona. She laid it on the table the way people lay down a winning hand. She spoke quickly, kindly, about new starts and practicalities. Then in a smaller voice that wanted to sound reasonable, she said, we should also talk about the cars and the account Drew left you. I don't want to fight, Maggie. If we can make an arrangement, If you transfer the SUV to me, I can make sure your time with Noah we can be flexible. I looked at the brochure. I looked at her ring, which she still wore, because grief etiquette is complicated and no one's owed a timeline. Sweetheart, I said, my time with Noah is not a tip you hand a waitress to ensure a larger pour. It's his childhood. I kept my voice level. I kept my hands still. After she left, I wrote down her words as closely as I could remember them. 2 days later, I went to see Rohan with my notebook, a simple paper calendar, and a file folder that had once held old recipes. We sat in a room where the carpet had learned to forgive coffee stains. I slid the folder across to him and said, "This is not an accusation. This is a pattern." He read quietly, and his quiet was not indifferent. When he finished, he tapped the corner of the letter from Drew. "Your son was careful," he said. "Careful love is a kind of engineering." We talked through options. He explained that moving a child out of state without agreement or court order could be a violation. He told me about temporary orders and emergency hearings. He told me none of this had to be a war. "But it does have to be orderly," he said, "and timely." That night, Vanessa texted a photo of a sunset that looked like a brochure had prayed for it. She wrote, "See, how could this be bad for him?" I typed and deleted 3 answers. I ended with, "Let's make decisions with people who specialize in decisions." Then I put my phone face down and set out Noah's backpack for school the next day because some rituals hold back the tide much better than speeches. I did not sleep. I made tea and walked the house like a watchman who'd lost his clock. I paused in front of Drew's photo on the mantel. He was holding Noah at a pumpkin patch, both of them in sweaters I'd bought on clearance. I told the picture the plan. I promised my son that I would do this the way he asked, without fury, with paper, by morning light. And then, when the morning came, Rohan filed the motion. We asked the court for a temporary order, 60 days to quiet the noise while grown-ups found their maturity. We asked for clarity about travel. We asked for the simple mercy of time used correctly. The courthouse in Larimer County has windows that let the morning in whether you're ready for it or not. I wore my church jacket, the navy one with the good seams, because a person should never meet a judge feeling like loose thread. Rohan met me on the steps with a nod and a paper cup of coffee he knew I would only sip. Inside, the air smelled faintly of printers and a civility people agree to for the sake of their children. We waited on a wooden bench that had been sanded by years of nervous hands. Vanessa arrived a few minutes later in a charcoal suit that could have testified on its own behalf. She looked past me, and then at me, and then at the floor, like grief and strategy were taking turns with her attention. Her attorney whispered in her ear. I could not hear the words, but I recognized the cadence. "Let me talk for you." When our case was called, we stood. The judge, Helen Ortiz, wore the calm that comes from remembering the law is not a storm, it is the levee. We stated our names. Rohan spoke in a voice that had room for everyone in it. He did not accuse. He offered a timeline, dates, receipts, emails, school notices. He laid down the small stones of our weeks in order, and the path they formed was simple enough for anyone to follow. I watched Judge Ortiz read. Her eyes didn't hurry. When Vanessa's attorney spoke, he emphasized opportunity, family support in Arizona, better weather for a child with tender lungs. He said Vanessa had no intention of cutting me out. She only wanted to move forward with her life in a way that made sense. He said a lot of sentences with the word just. When the judge asked if I wanted to add anything, I stepped to the microphone and held it, the way you hold a letter from someone who can't write to you anymore. "Your Honor," I said, "my son left me instructions. He asked me to choose paper over anger. I am doing that. This notebook is not a list of accusations. It is a record of a child's ordinary needs. I am asking the court to give us time to meet those needs without a highway between us." I didn't cry. My voice is not heroic, but it can be steady when a little boy's breath is on the line. Judge Ortiz looked at Vanessa. "Miss Brooks," she said, "this court understands ambition and new starts. It also understands 7-year-olds who deserve predictable mornings." She asked a few direct questions, the kind that don't hide behind adjectives. Did Vanessa have a firm job offer? Was there a signed lease? How many nights had Noah spent with childcare instead of a parent since January? Were prescriptions filled on schedule? Vanessa answered. Some responses were neat. Others were not. That is the thing about dates and receipts. They do not memorize your story. They remember their own. The order came quietly. Temporary custody to me for 60 days. Parenting time for Vanessa. Supervised for now, with a schedule as plain as a kitchen calendar. No travel with Noah out of Colorado without written court permission. A review hearing set before the 60 days expired. A suggestion, gentle but firm, for parent education courses because love benefits from instruction as much as grief does. The gavel did not bang. It simply arrived at the table with the certainty of a hand you can lean on. In the hallway, Vanessa's shoulders shook, and for a moment I saw a woman, not an adversary. "I didn't mean to be the villain," she said. "I am tired of rooms that look like the one we just left." I told her I was tired of rooms like that too. "Let's use the time well," I said, and I meant it. She looked at me as if there was a door in my words, and she couldn't decide whether to open it or knock on it forever. The first week of the order, the house learned Noah again. I moved a small bookcase into my bedroom so he could fall asleep to the sound of pages turning. We made a chart on the refrigerator with simple squares. Medicine morning, medicine night, reading, play, call with mom. He put stickers on the squares he finished and drew little stars where he wanted more courage. We built a tent with sheets for the nights when breathing sounded heavier than his dreams. He named the tent Fort Quiet. He said in Fort Quiet, the air felt polite. We visited the school counselor who had a bin of sand and small plastic animals she called story helpers. Noah made the dinosaur from his drawing walk across the sand toward a felt lake. He put 3 figures in a paper boat and told the counselor, "The lake is fine when the boat is strong." I wrote that sentence down when we got home, because some things you never want to trust to memory alone. Vanessa came for visits that first month with a careful smile and cookies from a bakery that boxed their goods like apologies. We sat at the kitchen table and talked about mundane things, school projects, library due dates, as if we had not just asked a stranger in a black robe to referee our lives. I could tell those hours cost her. She wanted to be the kind of mother who didn't need witnesses. I wanted that for her too. The supervisor we hired was kind and unobtrusive, a woman named Dora with a talent for disappearing into crosswords and reappearing when tension did. On the 3rd visit, Noah tugged Vanessa's sleeve and asked if her new house would have a tree with a low branch he could read in. Vanessa said maybe. She didn't say when or where the tree would grow. Rohan checked in once a week, not because the court required it, but because he has a habit of looking in on things he has set in motion. He reminded me to keep my notebook honest, to write down the good as faithfully as the hard. So I wrote. Vanessa brought new spacer for inhaler. Noah liked it. I wrote, Vanessa read 2 chapters of the space book, voices for each character. Noah laughed. I wrote, Noah cried when visit ended, calmed within 10 minutes after Legos. Paper can be merciful when you ask it to hold the whole picture. Midway through the 60 days, a rumor floated into our circle, one of those community whispers that arrives dressed like concern. A friend of a friend had seen Vanessa at a going-away party. There were toasts. Scottsdale was named out loud. A realtor had been tagged on social media. I did not confront Vanessa. I took a screenshot and printed it as if it were a recipe I might need later. The next morning, Vanessa texted to ask if she could take Noah to an all-day event 2 towns over. The schedule didn't fit the order. I wrote back, "We need to stick with what the court set." She sent a single word, "Fine," that looked much heavier than its 4 letters. That afternoon, Noah's teacher called to say he had written about Fort Quiet in his composition book, and would I send a note explaining that it wasn't a place, it was a plan. I laughed, then cried, then wrote the note with a picture of the tent so the class wouldn't think we'd moved into a fort. When I showed the letter to Noah, he asked if the judge had forts. I told him everyone needs one, even the people who seem like they have keys to all the doors. At the next status hearing, Vanessa's attorney argued for lifting supervision and loosening the travel restriction for a trial weekend. Rohan stayed consistent. He praised what went well. He pointed gently to what did not. He asked the court to keep the structure in place a little longer, framing it not as a punishment, but as scaffolding for a building that was not finished. Judge Ortiz kept her sentences short. "For now, no travel," she said. "For now, supervision stays. The child is adjusting. We will not introduce turbulence for the sake of an adult's timeline." The word turbulence sat between us like a tray table that wouldn't latch. Outside the courtroom, Vanessa's jaw worked. She said she felt chained to a zip code. I said I understood and I meant it, but I also said Noah is chained to his lungs, sweetheart. Routine is his air. She did not like that sentence. Sometimes the truth needs a softer coat. I am still learning how to tailor it. The next weeks were a repetition that some would call dull, and we called peace. Mornings, oatmeal, inhaler, jacket, bus. Afternoons, homework, snack, check-in call with Vanessa, play. Nights, reading, breath check, lights out. In the cracks between those small anchors, recovery had room to grow. Noah joined a little theater program at the community center. The other children, brave and wobbly, taught him that lines are just breaths arranged. He made a friend on our street who collected bottle caps and called them his treasures from the carbonated world. We had family dinner on Sundays with the neighbor couple who treat everyone like their cousins. Every time the weekly call with Rohan ended, I wrote one sentence in my notebook like a blessing. We used the time well today. And then, in the last week before our 60 days were up, Vanessa called and asked if she could stop by alone. She arrived without a bouquet and without her attorney. She sat at my kitchen table and fixed her gaze on a scuff mark on the floor, the shape of Nebraska. "I can't win this," she said. "Not right now, and I'm too tired to keep pretending I can be in 2 states at once." She slid an unsigned agreement across the table. It proposed that I retain primary custody, that she have scheduled visits, increasing over time with demonstrated consistency, that she pay support in an amount Rohan would later call fair, and that she not relocate Noah without court approval. She kept her eyes on Nebraska. "If I sign," she whispered, "it doesn't mean I don't love him. It just means I know what I'm not good at yet." I wanted to tell her that knowing your limits is a form of love most people never learn. Instead, I poured tea and said, "We can put him first" in the same sentence. We went over the pages slowly, like reading a poem we didn't want to misunderstand. When Rohan joined us by speakerphone, he did not gloat. He did what good men do when the right thing is also the hard thing. He made it normal. That night, after Vanessa left, Noah crawled into Fort Quiet with his flashlight and a book about stars. He asked if the sky changes houses when people move. I said the sky is the one neighbor that never sells. He nodded and fell asleep with the book open to a page about constellations that sailors used when they needed to trust something steady. The next morning, I opened Drew's letter again. I ran my finger under the sentence about disciplined kindness until the paper felt warm. I thought about courts and coffee-stained carpets and the logic of a child's breath. I thought about boats and lakes and whether I had any right at all to feel relief. Maybe relief is simply gratitude without the noise. I put the letter away and started breakfast. The kettle began to sing. Outside, the mountains held their shape, the way promises hold when you keep them small and daily. We signed in early summer, the kind of morning when the world seems newly ironed. The agreement sat between us, no longer a theory, but a map with mile markers. Rohan initialed where the law likes its corners tidy. Vanessa wrote her name slowly, as if each letter might break if rushed. When it was my turn, my hand did not shake. I thought of Drew's sentence, use paper, not anger, and I realized he had given me a bridge I could cross without looking down. The court converted our signatures into something with a seal, the gold kind that looks ceremonial, but mostly means the adults have chosen clarity. Primary custody to me. Scheduled visits for Vanessa, increasing with consistency, a generous summer week later if things held steady. Child support in a number that would not fix anything it shouldn't fix, but would carry what it should. No relocation without permission. It read like a recipe for plain bread. And yet in our kitchen, that plain bread was a feast. The day after the order, Noah and I took the bus to the library to get a new card with his name on it. He chose 3 books about boats and one about a boy who builds forts out of ordinary boxes. We ate ice cream on a bench that was too warm and let it drip because sometimes a civilized life requires messes that can be licked. At home, we stuck the new visitation calendar on the fridge. I wrote Vanessa in ink the color of a friendly sky. Noah drew a star on each day she would come. Stars mean we look up, he explained, the way only 7-year-olds and poets do. The first month under the new schedule, Vanessa arrived precisely, like a train that had learned the dignity of the timetable. Dora still came for part of the visits, fading more into her crosswords than before. Vanessa didn't try to buy Noah with treats, or not as often. She brought a kite one Saturday, and the 3 of us took it to the park as if we were a family that had stumbled into a simpler chapter. The wind did what wind does for the prepared. It lifted. Noah ran until he laughed and coughed, and then laughed again. We showed Vanessa how Fort Quiet worked, and she nodded like someone who'd discovered a rule that made a game fun again. In the small hours when the house took its careful breaths, I let myself acknowledge what had burned away. Loneliness has a way of dressing up like independence when you don't turn on the lights. I turned on the lights. I joined the Thursday knitting circle at church, a chorus of patient hands and good gossip. I signed up to help with the library's summer reading club, the one with the sticker charts and the goldfish crackers that leave salt stars on a table. I told the neighbor couple to knock without texting first. They did, with pies and jokes and the uncomplicated kind of love older people give because they have made their peace with the fact that life is short and pans are heavy. When July changed moods and brought sudden storms, Noah learned the trick of closing windows before the rain turned sideways. He practiced his little theater lines with his friend from down the street, the carbonated treasure collector, while I chopped vegetables and learned the names of his classmates, the way a cartographer learns mountains. He still asked hard questions at bedtime. Was Dad hurting when he left? Can you run out of love? If the judge retires, does our schedule retire? I answered carefully, not because I feared the truth, but because I respected the weight of his ears. Your dad went fast, I told him, the clean truth that doctors had given me wrapped in gentleness. Love is a well we dig by showing up, I said, thinking of calendars and tea and a million small yeses. And schedules belong to courts, not to a person's mood, I told him, proud of the day I could turn civics into comfort. Vanessa kept her word. There were slips, a late arrival, a week rearranged, but they were negotiated, not smuggled. She took a parenting class the court had suggested. She sent pictures of a sapling in a pot on her apartment patio, captioned, "Tree with a low branch someday." Once after a visit, she lingered in the doorway and looked at the photo of Drew on the mantel, pumpkin patch smiles still caught mid-orange. "He'd be mad at me," she said. "He'd be mad at me. Then he'd tell me to be better." I poured tea. "I think he'd skip the mad part," I said. "He didn't enjoy wasting time." She snorted at that. Grief makes room for jokes if you leave a chair open. Autumn arrived with its sermon about change. School letters came home with glue stick confetti inside. Noah learned to read stage directions and the difference between inhale and inspiration, which is to say he got stronger. The community center cast him as Child with Lantern in a winter play about ships finding harbor. He practiced walking slowly across our hallway with a battery candle held like a holiness. I sat on the stairs and watched, my heart learning to trust the ordinary again. Rohan came to dress rehearsal and clapped too loudly at the end. Lawyers aren't trained for measured applause when they love something. On the anniversary of the day the phone woke me, we didn't make it grand. We made it accurate. We drove to a lake that was not the lake cabin. Vanessa owned that now, and life's fairness does not always wear our favorite coat. We brought a thermos of hot chocolate and 2 paper boats folded from pages of an old magazine. I wrote discipline on one and kindness on the other, then felt corny and alive. Noah launched them. The wind argued with the boats, then relented. The boats kept their shape longer than I expected. "They are strong," Noah declared, "because we folded the corners hard." We watched them until they became part of the place. Time did what it does when you feed it wholesome food. It grew into itself. 6 months became a year, and the review hearing felt almost ceremonial. Judge Ortiz kept the order with small adjustments that honored consistency. Vanessa's time increased. Dora bowed out. The new rhythm didn't knock us over. It hummed under us like a dependable engine. I mailed the last payment on a small car loan and baked a cake for a reason that needed none. I began to sleep through the night often enough to believe it wasn't an accident. 2 years in, Noah asked if we could start a Saturday breakfast rule. Pancakes on odd-numbered weeks, waffles on even. We did, and he kept a chart, and our mornings acquired a pattern that made winter bearable. He discovered he loved stage crew more than the spotlight. "Lights are breaths for the whole room," he said, and I wrote it down because someday he might need to remember what he already knows. Vanessa moved within the city to an apartment near a park with a tree whose low branch turned out perfect for reading. She sent a photo of Noah there on a visit day, feet swinging, book open, inhaler unused in his pocket. 3 years after the courthouse introduced us to a different version of ourselves, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook that began with a tea bag I never drank. The pages are full now. Medicines and milestones, fights and forgiveness. The banal holiness of grocery lists rushed between school pickup and a breath check. There are entries I wish I hadn't had to write, and others that saved their own weight by existing. If I stack these notebooks, they make a small fortress. Fort Quiet has a paper cousin called Proof. Some nights, when the dishes are done and the house is safely clicking to a halt, I take out Drew's letter. The paper has softened, but the sentences have not. Kindness isn't soft, it's disciplined. I used to think discipline meant harshness. Now I know it often means keeping your voice at the right temperature so truth doesn't shatter when you pour it. I talk to my son the way people talk to graves, without needing the stone to answer. I tell him Noah can do his inhaler in 2 practiced breaths. I tell him the judge retired, but our order stands because promises bigger than people do not change their uniforms when someone hangs up theirs. I tell him Vanessa brings good muffins now, and sometimes advice I admit I need. I tell him his boy laughs more easily than he cries, and I tell him I am no hero, just persistent. On Noah's 10th birthday, he stood on a chair and made a toast with sparkling water. To boats, he said, and to people who fold their corners hard. The room, neighbors, Vanessa, Rohan, with a tie too bright for a lawyer, laughed and touched glasses. I looked at my grandson and felt grief and gratitude take each other's hands like cousins at a reunion. Later, when the house emptied of voices and crumbs, I sat with my tea and the kind of tired that earns sleep. I thought of all the mothers and grandmothers and tired guardians who turn paper into shelter because someone has to. I wanted to write them all a letter that began, "You are not overreacting when you insist on clarity," and ended, "May your kindness learn the discipline it needs." I do not know what our next chapter holds. I do know what we can hold. A calendar, a small inhaler, a well-stocked pencil cup, and the courage to keep sentences simple when the world gets complicated. If you are listening because you are scared for someone small and precious, this is the part I hope you remember. You don't have to be ferocious to be formidable. You can be the kind of steady that courts recognize and children can nap inside. Write it down. Take the class. Ask for help. Use the door that opens when you ask the law to be boring and humane. Build forts out of sheets and out of routines. Fold your corners hard. Tonight Noah is asleep in Fort Quiet, the battery candle throwing a gentle ellipse on the tent roof. The mountains are exactly where we left them. The photo on the mantel is not so much a shrine as a reminder of the man who engineered our bridge. I wash the cups, close the notebook, set the inhaler on the nightstand, and switch off the porch light. The house makes its small, brave sounds, and in that ordinary orchestra, I hear my son's voice the way I heard the kettle that first terrible morning, not loud, but certain. Use paper, Mom. Use kindness like a tool with an edge. I am learning. Every day I am learning.